and he's a scientist, and he's been out every week with the Edinburgh Resistance. It is the one and only Professor Richard Ennos.
Hello, it's great to see so many smiling faces. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you in this great movement, Saving Scotland. And I'd like to pay tribute to all of you for coming here today to risk ridicule, abuse, loss of friends, silencing, but you've still come here, and it's fantastic. And you're here to stand up against oppression. And when the history books are written, you can say, I was there. Now, I'm a scientist, but I'm also a son, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a grandfather. Actually, grandfathers haven't been mentioned very much. It's mostly grannies who die. I feel rather left out. And I'm here because I want to do something to create a world, a Scotland, that my children and my grandchildren can live in the future. Somewhere that's worth living in. Now, why are we here? Well, in March, unprecedented powers were given to the government. The Coronavirus Act 2020 was passed. And the original intention of this, apparently, was to save the NHS. And what's happened since then? Well, so as I remember it, Scotland was a society where we loved life. And it's been turned into somewhere where we just fear death. And that's an abomination. The government and the mainstream media have instilled fear into the population, and most of the population aren't here because they're still in fear. They've destroyed our livelihoods, our education, our culture, and they strip the joy out of life. And we're here to build a movement which is founded on love and trust, and something which can help us to remove this fear and can build a society which is worth living in. And that's why we're here. A Scotland that's fit for our children and our children's children. Now, I have three messages here for you, and the first one is a message of reassurance, and that is that we have very little to fear from COVID-19. My second message is one of warning, and it's a warning that we have everything to fear from our governments. And my third message is one of hope, that with Saving Scotland movement, based on love and mutual respect, we can build a society that's worthy of Scotland's people. So what's my message of reassurance? That we have little to fear from the virus. Well, the information's already there. It's in our Office for National Statistics, it's in the National Records of Scotland, and it's been really well analysed by the Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. That's where we should look for our information. Don't go to the BBC. And we know that the infection fatality rate, as we've heard, is that same as that of a bad flu. This COVID-19 is dangerous to the elderly and those with underlying health conditions. But to the young and healthy, it's really of little consequence at all, and certainly not dangerous to children at all. There have been no deaths of children under 15 in the whole of Scotland from COVID-19. 80% of people are asymptomatic, 99.9% of people will survive if they're infected. We have existing immunity, T-cell immunity, as a result of being exposed to previous coronaviruses. We've got effective treatments for hospitalised patients. And we've heard things about it, and we're learning more and more about that, and vitamin D, etc. So from that point of view, there is nothing to fear. And also the epidemic is absolutely over. We've had less than 10 deaths in Scotland per week for the last 7 weeks. 5 times more deaths are occurring due to flu at the moment than to COVID-19. It's killed less than 1.1% of the Scottish population, not 10%, as a recent opinion poll taken showed the Scottish population to believe. So they believed it's killed 100 times more people than it actually died. Absolutely ridiculous. What we have to do is remain shield the vulnerable. What we should let this virus pass through the population, gain immunity, and create a situation where it's safe for any people who are shielding to come out again. And we want to get on with our lives. Okay, I want to now turn to my warning message that we have everything to fear from our governments. And I'm going to deal with this in a number of different ways. First of all, I want to talk to you about the way in which the government have used these powers to enforce what they want. Okay, so they didn't educate us. They didn't trust us. No, they dictated to us. And they told us what we should do. And the way in which they made us do that was to instill fear into the population. And the way they did that was they actually employed the applied behavioural psychologists to develop strategies for compliance. And I quote from the SAGE report, "The perceived level of threat needs to be increased using hard-hitting emotional messaging." And that's produced huge levels of anxiety within Scotland, and probably 90% of the people in Scotland are still fearing as a consequence of this happening. People with fragile mental health, they're in anxiety. They are really in trouble at the moment, and it's because of that policy of inducing fear in the population. And and that's one thing, and the other thing that the government has done has decided in its wisdom that it should shut down anything that goes counter to their particular narrative. And so people like me and other people talking out against what's going on have been silenced. They've been ridiculed, and they've been smeared, and in compliance in that, and going hand in glove with that is the mainstream media. And they have an awful lot to answer for. And the question I'm going to ask now, is this a caring government? Is it doing its best for the Scottish people? Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the way in which the agenda has been manipulated. So at the beginning it was all about saving the NHS, but actually you may have noticed it's morphed since then, and it's now all about eliminating the virus from Scotland. Do you know that? It's called the Zero COVID policy. And it's implemented by somebody who actually doesn't seem to have any experience in this area, but yet is in charge of the public health of Scotland. And it's a policy which has had absolutely no scrutiny, and it has not been passed by any people who've got any experience in this area. And a little thought will tell you that this Zero COVID policy is absolute nonsense. It should never have been placed in the first place. And I'll give you 4 particular reasons why that is the case. First of all, we know from genetic studies that this virus came in many different places in Scotland, and since then it's spread throughout Scotland. Okay, so it's widespread in the community. There is no way in which you could have a Zero COVID policy because it's all over the place. This is only a policy which would have been of use at the very, very, very beginning, where we could just find 1 or 2 places where the virus had come in. We can't eliminate it. It's here. The second thing I should say is that this virus, about 80% of people who have it are asymptomatic. So if you wanted to find out where the virus was, you have to actually test the whole of the population. And you have to test the whole of the population multiple times. Is that something which is a feasible option? Absolutely ridiculous. Of course it isn't a feasible option. The third thing is that the test we have for COVID-19, a PCR test, and I've run PCRs, I know about PCR tests. This PCR test does not tell us where we've got somebody who is infected with the virus. It tells us where we've got bits of the virus lying around, and they could be lying around 60 days after a person has been infected. And moreover, the test has a significant, you'll get positive rates when false positive rates, and the rate at which people are finding the so-called virus using these tests is about the same proportion of cases which we are actually finding in Scotland. So what we're actually finding may just be false positives. So there are real problems with that test. And lastly, I don't know if you've noticed, but actually Scotland is joined to England, and actually people move between England and Scotland. And I don't think we're yet an island. I don't know, maybe we're going to be cut off at some future point in the future, but I don't think it's possible, if you eliminated the virus from Scotland, to stop it from entering when other people came into this country, which I think we actually do need, because it's good to have visitors. So this zero COVID policy is no good for controlling the virus. But of course it's very good for controlling the population, and that's why it's in place. So if you want to lock down an area, what you do is you go and you do loads and loads of tests there. You find so-called cases, and we've heard what cases mean. It doesn't mean that there's infection there. And you find enough of them, you say, oh dear, we'll have to lock this place down. And that's what's happened to Aberdeen. A very spiteful move, in my opinion. And the other thing I'd like to say about this is that actually finding that people are asymptomatic and have the virus is probably a good thing to find, because actually what we want to do is the virus to spread throughout the whole of the population, for immunity to be gained in the whole of the population, and then we can bring out those people who are susceptible to COVID-19. So it's a complete twisting of the true situation and a complete misinterpretation. But it's very useful for controlling people, and it's why we're still in lockdown weeks and weeks after there have hardly been any cases. And it's destroying people's livelihoods, it's destroying people's lives. People who have people who in the performing arts, they haven't been able to perform for about 5 or 6 months. We've got businesses going bust, we've got whole people being laid off, we've got our education being destroyed, we've got bankruptcy, and we've got misery, because we've got people forced to wear these damned masks. And we're also not supposed to kind of have any kind of social contact with people. That's a bad thing. So I ask you, is this the action of a caring government? Okay, in a pandemic, the situation, you take on extra powers because you want to protect people. And I want to just think about all of the various people who should be protected and whether they have been protected or not. So at the beginning, before we actually locked down, I actually wrote to the Scottish Government, and I said, look here, we already know that this COVID-19 is very serious for people of old and who have comorbidities. And the most important thing that you should do is to protect those people. And you can use your very scarce resources in order to test people who are going into those places where there are very vulnerable people to make sure they haven't got COVID. I got a reply about a month later saying, stay at home. protect them, protect the NHS. Well, actually, what actually happened? Well, at first they admitted that they sent 300 people from hospital straight into the care homes, taking with them the virus. Actually, but later on they had to admit they sent 900. And more recently, it actually appears that they actually knew that some of these people were actually positive for COVID-19. So what they did was exactly the opposite of what you should have done in this situation. And they killed those people. And those people who were caring for them, as we've heard, were overstretched. They couldn't deal with them. And a lot of those people died from things because they weren't fed or because they weren't looked after. And their nearest and dearest were not allowed to go near them and help them. And it's absolutely terrible and absolutely disgusting. Okay, so that's the elderly. The next group of people who really seriously we should look after are those people who are already ill. People in hospital with cancer. People undergoing cancer treatments. And what has happened? Well, the NHS has been virtually shut down. And those people have had their treatments taken away. And I know people who are undergoing cancer treatments at the moment, and they have to wait till October before it starts again. And even in a government report, it's been estimated that 200,000 people will die prematurely as a consequence of shutting down the NHS. And they still will not open up. And why are the doctors complicit in this? Well, it's because they've been sent emails saying, if you come out and tell the general public what's going on in this hospital, you'll lose your job. And that's what's happening. And I'm actually asking people who are working and know that there are a few brave people who've told us about what's going on in the NHS, but I'm asking people who are in the know to stand up and be counted. That's what